And it's now time to say a very good morning to Baroness Hoey of Lisle Hill and Rathlin, non-affiliated peer, of course, in the House of Lords. A very happy St Patrick's Day to you, Kate.
Oh, thank you very much. I should have given you a shamrock to put on.
Yes, I didn't actually. One of the things about life not being completely normal is that, normally I'd be on the tube and you'd probably pass somebody selling shamrocks, but, we don't see anybody anymore. So I haven't seen anyone wearing one this morning either.
No, I haven't either. So I'm in London, so I haven't seen one yet.
No, I mean, there's some quite extraordinary things to discuss. Let's kick off first off with Boris Johnson's statement and speech yesterday about Britain's sort of place in the world. Some people this morning are saying that he's been a bit soft with China because he's talking about doing more trade with them. He's talking about doing more investment deals with the Chinese government. What do you make of that?
Well, I think we're doing trade deals and trading with a lot of countries that have pretty bad human rights at the moment. But of course, China is that little bit even more worse, if you can
Yes.
say that, because of what we found out and what they're doing to their Muslim people and also to the Tibetans. But it is I can see the difficulty, because if we were just simply to say, right, that's it, we're not going to do any more trade with China, we're stopping everything. Well, it would, first of all, cause a lot of job losses in this country, but also if the rest of the world is kind of carrying on trading, then we are not going to be able to make much difference. So I think that one of these things that really needs to be tackled internationally, with a lot of countries agreeing they're going to do certain things. And, the European Union is already trading a lot with China and even entering into more arrangements. So I think he was attempting to have a balanced statement that was going to keep all those people who feel very strongly about China accepting we were doing something, but actually not going to go far enough for many, many people. And, I'm just not quite sure of what the answer is on this, other than that we have to keep protesting about things that we're doing. But I'm not sure we can just, if you look at anything you buy in your shop now, I've started to look when we could buy things so much is made in China. And, maybe if people really feel strongly, they should just say, well, I'm not buying that anymore.
Yes, I think that would be helpful, actually, because quite often, I've noticed that as well lately in supermarkets and things, that they've started labelling up fruits and vegetables and saying where they've come from, which is quite useful information, actually, sometimes, if you want to make a purchase based upon whatever you think of that particular country. But I think most people's worry about China is that it's kind of making this rather slow and sometimes not so slow march towards kind of world domination. And I think, we'd be wise to not get too close to them, if you know what I mean.
Well, what I'm very disturbed about is the way that our universities are just making huge amounts of money by bringing in literally plane loads of Chinese students. Even in Northern Ireland there a few weeks ago, there was a big outcry because plane loads of Chinese students arrived right in the middle of the pandemic.
Right.
And, they're harvesting that, and I think a lot of those students, when they come, they don't mix, they don't actually change their views, and they're very much controlled by the Chinese embassy here. Yeah. So I do think you're right. I would love to see everything that we buy labelled better, because in future I think we want to buy home produced food much more than buying things from the rest of the EU or the rest of the world.
Absolutely. I was quite interested as well in Boris's suggestion that he was going to invite both Australia and India, and I think there was one other country, maybe Japan as well, to the G7 when it's happening down in Newquay later on this year. So that's an interesting kind of development as well, isn't it?
Well, that's part of what really we have to be doing now that we've left the shrinking little European Union. We've now got to look east, and of course we'd already started to do that, and there was a lot of work going on with more trading arrangements with both Australia. Hopefully we'll get a proper trade deal with Australia, but Malaysia, Singapore, a lot of India, all those countries, they are the growing economies, and we want to be working with them, and we have that link because of the Commonwealth. That's where Her Majesty the Queen becomes a really important person, because she is kind of revered in all those countries, all those big Asian countries that are doing so well. And we have to now, and I think that's why in the Foreign Office they're making the Commonwealth unit much, much bigger, much more important unit than it ever used to be, because everywhere before, they used to just look to the EU. That was where we looked. Everything had to be shifted, and now we can look east and do things that we couldn't have done when we were still a member of the EU.
Well, the EU are too busy now putting their toys back into the pram after their sort of sulk and their sort of petulant strop that they had over the vaccine, where they were ridiculously going against even their own medicines organisation to say that the AstraZeneca vaccine wasn't safe. I mean, it makes no sense at all. I can't believe that they're just doing it out of spite, but I think they are.
I think certainly I'm sure the original idea was that, but perhaps they didn't think through that how much their own people were going to be quite angry. There was some very interesting vox pops with people in France who were quite annoyed, and it is so ridiculous to try and punish, as if it's punishing us because they're not going to have the vaccine. I mean, it's worrying too, in the sense that even if we're all vaccinated and everybody is feeling quite safe in this country, obviously if other countries don't go through the same process and get vaccinated, there'll probably still be restrictions on travel. And for a lot of people, apart from wanting to get out and shopping normally and seeing people and getting your hair cut, as I desperately need, we want to be able to go on holidays and go and travel and that. So, but I think I think what it's done is made those soft Remainers who really didn't want to leave but weren't too unhappy in the end now absolutely clear that it was the right thing to do, because just imagine if we'd still been in the EU, it would have been absolutely terrible.
No, I know, absolutely right. We would have been in a really bad spot, and we'd have also what would have been worse would have been we'd have been at their beck and call. Yeah. Can you imagine how awful the EU would have been to Britain if we'd had the referendum and people had punted for it and lost it, so that we'd had to remain in? I mean, they would never have stopped punishing us.
No, and can I just remind you, and I'm sure you're fed up with me reminding you, but of course that's exactly the position that part of the United Kingdom has been left, in the sense that Northern Ireland, when we change, will have to go along with it. And that's why there is so much opposition to the Northern Ireland Protocol. And, I'm pleased to say that, behind the scenes, there's lots of talking going on, lots of suggestions about what could happen, because ultimately I think we are going to have to, take the EU on this. And, if they've already threatened to take us to court, well, so be it. Let them, frankly, if they, what can they do?
Well, this is it. I mean, the language
they can find us a lot of money, and we simply don't pay it or take it off what they think we're going to pay them over the next few years.
Well, exactly right. And I mean, they're not really in a position to push us around anymore. So the language they're using is entirely inappropriate, in my view, as if they are sort of, still the bullying kind of, stay-at-home master who doesn't allow his wife out.
I think that some of them haven't quite yet realised that we've actually left, and
no.
They still have that language of what the EU Commission says the EU Commission will get. Well, tough, because now we've got someone like David Frost who isn't going to put up with that. I think the British people are solidly behind us now on this whole question, and we are going to see other EU countries. I think the whole AstraZeneca issue and the whole question of vaccination is going to make just that the growth in some of the EU countries that were already being very angry about certain things the EU were doing, perhaps that will make that the strength of their feeling.
Yes. I don't think there's any doubt that they're suffering from major delusions of grandeur. I heard a EU official in an interview the other day saying, complaining about the fact that Britain hasn't given them any vaccines. We have given you billions of vaccines, they said, right? And I think they said something like 33 billion vaccines have been given to the British people. And it's like, well, you haven't given them. AstraZeneca has given them, because AstraZeneca happens to have a factory in Belgium. But it doesn't mean that the EU has actually granted them to us.
We didn't have the bureaucracy and all the paperwork to go through to actually order it in time to get it the way they have had to do. So it's the advantage of being, taking back control, being able to make your own decisions, and that's what we were able to do.
Well, exactly right. What about what happened yesterday in Parliament when David Davis got up, a man that you'll know pretty well? Nobody's quite sure why he did it, but he certainly decided to set the cat amongst the pigeons in Scotland by using parliamentary privilege to accuse the SNP and Nicola Sturgeon of a cover-up, effectively.
Well, I think, David, if anyone was going to do this kind of parliamentary privilege exposure, it's David Davis, because he's done things before and he's extremely good at that kind of thing. I sound a bit naive, but I genuinely wish I could get my head around the whole Scottish issue.
Yeah.
I find it very, very difficult, but my basic instinct is that, of course, I just would love to see this affect the Scottish Nationalist Party vote in the coming elections. I think the Scottish Nationalist Party has behaved so badly on all sorts of issues, and their whole anti-English, anti-British attitude has really, really, I think, annoyed a lot of people. So if this brings it home more to people, because I think even for a lot of Scottish people, it's quite confusing about dates, and people are not quite understanding why is it so dreadful if she knew something on a certain date, So I'm pleased that he's got something that is going to make it clearer.
Yeah, I mean, I think for a lot of people who may not know the ins and outs and the absolute detail of it all, it's the optics of it that look bad. I mean, Nicola Sturgeon does appear to present herself as the kind of empress of all of Scotland, and she's not really carrying the weight of everybody's support when she does that, because not everybody voted for her, not everybody wants independence, and not everybody thinks the SNP is the greatest thing since sliced bread.
No, and she's had that sort of advantage of being able to do every day a daily COVID report, which I think there's no doubt about it. The beginning of the whole pandemic was something that I suppose Scottish people actually liked, initially, that she was coming out every day and speaking and telling things. But then as time goes on, not only do you get tired of the face, but also the way that it seemed, certainly to us here, that she was always trying to be either ahead of what Boris Johnson was going to do or doing the opposite of what we were doing. And I think it began to see that she was, partly using, it probably sounds a bit unfair, but partly using the pandemic as just an opportunity to be able to carve her own kind of, as you say, a kind of figurehead person. Yes. But the elections are coming, and people, and I have to say, George Galloway, who's I've known for a long, long time, but wouldn't always agree with politically.
Yes.
I think he's been doing a great job about trying to get people to work together. Who are anti the SNP and try and get that vote. And I think that's going to be very, very important.
I think so. I think also the new Labour leader up there looks quite smart as well.
Yes, and he's made some good contributions. I mean, we've missed that. And of course we missed, I think the Conservatives missed when they had to change their leader too. And I think so we might be going back to a bit more what would be normal politics in Scotland. And then, of course, we're going to have a by-election in...
Well, I was going to ask you about the Hartlepool situation. It's a bit embarrassing for the Labour Party, and I know it's probably unfair to bring the two things together, but a bit embarrassing for them to have a guy called Mike Hill who's had to resign over claims of sexual harassment, given what's been going on this week.
Yeah, I mean, it is, but of course it's been something that's been around even at the last general election.
Yes.
There were lots of rumours and so on. But it's going to be interesting because we haven't had a by-election. I think it's, I read somewhere it's the longest time ever, between by-elections.
Right?
Yes. And so that's going to be very interesting because it's going to be a test of Keir Starmer and the Labour Party, whether it's made any difference having a new leader. And of course, Hartlepool was one of the sort of seats that that held on when there was a very well-known candidate. Richard Tice was the candidate for the Brexit Party.
Yes.
There was a chance of him actually winning that. But Mike Hill held on. So I think this time there'll be a bit of a reaction to, obviously, the circumstances, although we can't really talk about that because it's a legal situation. But I think that'll be a day that the media will be quite interested in what's happening.
Yes, I mean, I've heard Labour Party members saying it's going to be difficult for them to hold the seat on the basis that they can't go and campaign. But nobody can go and campaign, so I don't see how that's necessarily going to be a problem for them. But they may use that, I suppose, as an excuse.
I suppose they'll probably have it on the same day as the council elections in May, when I think people are going to be allowed eventually to go out and deliver leaflets to people.
Well, I would have thought by May we should be in pretty good shape, shouldn't we?
Sorry?
I would have thought by May we should be able to manage to get people to actually knock on other people's doors. I still just find the relaxing far too slow. Yeah.
It's just so depressing that we don't. And certainly in Northern Ireland, people are very angry this morning because there's no dates or data being given to anything about shops opening and retail generally. So it's not an even picture across the UK.
No. And finally, Kate, what's your take on this whole conversation about women and safety on the streets? Because obviously that's been the big subject of the weekend and all the way through this week as well, after what happened, dreadful event on Clapham Common and then the demonstration at the weekend. What's your take on the way this is kind of unfurling, if you like?
Well, it was a terrible, terrible, tragic murder and something terrible for the family. But I'm not sure that the events of Saturday, have I think they've kind of diverted almost from the sadness and the original ideas of the vigil, which was to commemorate her. And there's no doubt about it. When you look at the pictures, that there were people who came along specifically who go to kind of almost every demonstration with the purpose of starting problems. But I lived in London, for a long time, 30, 40 years. You kind of were new to be careful and to think about things like that. But I think what we've got to not have, and I find it very silly, some of the people who've been coming out talking about, hopefully just not meaning it, but saying it as a sort of way of getting a headline about curfews for men at 6 o'clock and all that nonsense. There are bad people, and they can be bad women or they can be bad men. In this particular case, I'm not sure what else any of the institutions could have done. In terms of stopping that murder, lighting in the streets, more lighting that these. I think the government's been talking about. I'm not sure.
Well, we hear a lot about lighting, but I was talking to a lot of people yesterday on the show who said to me that one of the biggest problems in their area, and it seems all over the country, is they switch the street lights off at midnight in a lot of places. Now, that seems to me to be something that you could very easily fix and just leave them on.
Yes, I suppose that does happen in some places. I remember years and years ago, living in the country, walking home from the bus late at night up a country road, and there weren't any lights. And frankly, when they did put lights in eventually, years later, you were walking up and you actually felt people could be behind the ditch looking at you and seeing you, whereas when it was all dark, you felt almost
strangely safe. Yeah.
It's very, very sad, and I think there's no doubt about it that many women will be being more fearful, and I hope that doesn't stop them actually saying, they have a right to be out, they have a right to be living a normal life, and we can't let this kind of thing change our way of living.
No, I wonder as well whether it's part of this whole kind of culture of fear that we've been living under for the best part of the last year, that people have been telling us not to go out, telling us not to kind of mingle with one another, and this is almost an extra kind of arm of that in a way.
Yes, the lockdown has, I think, changed people's behaviour. It'd be really interesting when we all go back again. Will there ever be in the near future, a near normal again? I think what's worrying me is that people have accepted so much of the rules. In a way, they've gone along with the restrictions without necessarily thinking, why is this necessary?
Right.
There was a necessity at one stage, I think, for probably the lockdown, but now that people are being vaccinated and everything has gone down in terms of numbers of people getting COVID and numbers of people in hospital, why are we not starting to really open up?
I know.
And people are just going to get very fed up, and more importantly, for a lot of people, it is going to be the end of their small business.
Yes, I'm afraid it is. You're absolutely right, as ever, Kate. Thank you very much indeed for your time and for those opinions. Baroness Hoey of Lisle Hill and Rathlin talking to us there from London today, where there seemed to be somebody in the background with some kind of a hedge cutter or something. I'm not quite sure, but it was a bit of a humming sound. If you could hear it, it wasn't your imagination.